writers, agents, and publishers, for the first time since the Gutenberg Press, find themselves lost in a maze of mystery as technology alters the shape of the publishing industry. Searching for Answers is a group of writers throwing pop culture, writing, and publishing into a crucible of clarity, passion, and humor. This group is the Right Pack. In this episode, we are going to discuss the shape of stories. We'll see how this episode shapes up. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Right Pack Radio. This is your host, producer, and frustrated author, David Allen Lucas. Also voice actor, president of St. Louis Writers Guild, president of Winding Trails Media. And we're doing Gateway Con with St. Louis Writers Guild, the Greater St. Louis Sisters in Crime, St. Louis Publishers Association, St. Louis Press Club, the Missouri Romance Writers of America, the Saturday Writers, and the Midwest Mystery Writers of America. June 15th through 17th in St. Louis, Missouri at the Renaissance Hotel. This is a premium writers conference. It's also a book fair and a writers retreat. For more information, check out www.stlwritersguild.org. Again, www.stlwritersguild.org. And the reason I said I was a frustrated writer, I took my story all the way back to plot and characters. So, what I was hoping to have done by the end of April might be done by the end of June. So stay tuned. And with me today is the Madame of Murder herself,
Fedora Amos. I write Victorian whodunits like Jack the Ripper in St. Louis, Mayhem at Buffalo Bill's Wild West, and soon to come this year or next or sometime down the road is Have Your Ticket Punched by Frank James. And also I'm going to be at Gateway Con. I'm going to be doing a sequel to our I Love a Mystery. I think it's I Love a Mystery 2, What Makes Mystery Tick.
Ooh. I might poke my head in on that one.
Well, you bet. Yeah.
Assuming I'm not running around like a crazy man like Brad and I were doing last year. Also with us is my lovely wife.
Hi, I'm Melanie Lucas. I actually got some writing done this week. So
Yay!
Yeah, I'm thinking of starting a competition to see which one of us can get our books done first.
You know what? I actually might need that competition. That might work out. And, let me just say
We
this
all
quickly.
need good incentives.
We do. And to be honest with you, after the long drought of a writer's block I've had because, let me just share a little piece of advice before I go on to the next person. Artists out there, writers out there, never put your stuff on hold. I did. I am paying for it. Painfully. I'd rather have my teeth surgically extracted without Novocaine. And with that, Brad, over to you.
As somebody who studies 18th century medicine, I would not agree with that. Yes, I am Brad R. Cook, and I am the author of, The Iron Chronicles, The Airdranium Adventures, and Tales of the Gear Blade. All three are steampunk series. So check them out, please. You can get Tales of the Gear Blade Episode 2 just dropped on Kindle's Amazon, for Amazon Kindle, direct from Amazon. So check that out. You can find it all at bradrcook.com. Usually I'm way better at doing that whole intro thing.
No, you can have had the last 2 days from hell, so we'll let you go with it. All right. So.
Hey, actually, real quick, I want to throw a shout out to everyone who came to my workshop yesterday. Obviously, this is in the past, so it was the first weekend in April. Huge crowd. We had a great time talking about pitching at St. Louis Writers Guild and all about writers' conferences, but it was great. So thanks to everyone who came out.
And for those who have missed that episode, missed St. Louis Writers Guild workshop, one, it will be repeated at Gateway Con, but also, two, check out, I don't know what season, but a previous season of Right Pack Radio on pitching, and you'll get a lot of the same stuff. Not necessarily all of it, because Brad's added to it, but a lot of it's still out there. And on that note, today we're going to talk about the shape of stories. There's some great videos out there with Kurt
Kurt Vonnegut?
I have just neutered the man, Kurt Vonnegut, and what he calls the shapes of stories. But I don't know if he includes all the shapes or not. So let's talk about what is a shape of a story. I mean, is it 8x4 book? What is it? What are we talking about?
Well,
It's a 5.5 by 8.5 book. So.
No, seriously.
what Vonnegut does is use kind of a sine wave sort of thing. We always call it a story arc, but it's not an arc in the sense of just an arch. It has below the line of normalcy, and above the line stuff, and kind of floats around a little bit. So that it's not exactly a perfect arch at all, ever, do you think?
Okay.
No, and in fact, I know you're going to do this. I'm going to say, knowing what he talked about, and I'm going to throw in math. Oh my God, writers of math. You've got sine, you've got cosine waves, and you got more. Go ahead.
I was just saying, this makes perfect sense if you've seen the video. For those of us that haven't seen the video, which actually everyone in this room has seen the video, because we all just watched it, please stop this, pause this, and go watch the video, and then come back. It'll make more sense. But Kirk drew a graph on a big blackboard with life being great at the top of this graph, life being terrible at the bottom, life being a normal day in the middle, and then the x-axis was just the time across the story,
Right, beginning to end.
beginning to end.
Do you know how to access that for the people who want to access it?
You can find it on YouTube. That's what I'm going to say is, if you do type in shape of stories, and then you should see Kurt's name pop up. Click on that. The good one we watched was about 4.5 minutes long, so not bad. Brad.
I was gonna throw out there are actually a bunch of blogs on this too. You can find graphs and memes and graphics of all these different graphs that Vonnegut's drawn. I've seen them before. They have great blog posts on on his idea of what the shape of a story should look like,
Right.
or do look like.
Well, and he covers in that video 3 shapes of stories. I believe we can go beyond that, but let's talk briefly about his 3 shapes that he talked about. One is, he calls it the man falls in a hole. And it doesn't have necessarily to be a man, doesn't necessarily have to be somebody who falls in a hole. But basically, you take a man who's, we'll call him above average, having as one of the great wealth down to the poorest to poverty line, the y-axis, right? Thank you. It's been a while since I've done graphing. Put him above the line, life is good, and suddenly he falls into trouble. And now he's way down in the negative side. He's got to climb his way back up, and by the end, he's finally out of his trouble bubble. So,
Nobody did this better than Alfred Hitchcock.
yes.
Some of his very best movies were like that. Jimmy Stewart, who is in just, he just happens to be in an open carriage, and some dying man comes and whispers in his ear, and then everybody in the world is out to get him because they think he has knowledge which he doesn't even have. And they steal his wife, and she sings Que Sera, Sera, and it just goes on like that, as he is in a terrible hole trying to get his family out, and he doesn't even know what's going on. I love it. It's The Man Who Knew Too Much.
The remake of A Man Who Knew Too Much. That's the only movie Alfred Hitchcock ever remade of his own.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's actually 2 versions of it, and they're both.
I don't think I
full
saw it.
of-
I've never seen the first version. Who's in that?
I don't remember. I have seen it because I actually, okay, now I feel old when I say I own it on VHS, which I don't have VHS to watch anymore. But I don't remember. But the remake is 100% better in my opinion. So.
And there's strangers on a train.
Oh yeah.
In which a tennis player just is involved with a silly conversation with a stranger and somehow gets involved in dual murders as they trade murders for each other. Wonderful.
Well, how
Man
about?
gets in a deep, deep hole.
Well, what about North by Northwest?
That too.
I was thinking of that,
I mean,
yeah.
with Cary Grant? Yeah. Cary
Yes.
Grant he is a man who becomes basically identified as the wrong man. He answers a page. Well, actually, that's not quite true. They're paging somebody to come to the phone. The bad guys are looking for this person. Cary Grant signals to the pager that, and by the way, this is back in the day when people actually called out, Brad Cook, Brad Cook, we'll call on line 4, Brad Cook, line 4, you know. They're looking around for Brad Cook, and in this case, that's not who it was. But anyway, Cary Grant's character asks to use a telephone and wants to know what a telephone is. So the guy who's doing the paging takes him towards the telephone, where the bad guys are, and I presume Cary Grant is this super secret agent that they were looking for. And boy, does he go down in the rabbit's hole after that. But eventually does get out of it and almost falls off Mount Rushmore. And for the rest of it, go watch the movie. And if you haven't seen it yet, I'm sorry for spoiler alerts, but where have you been? Brad.
Yeah, so real quick, there, just to throw it out since we're talking about Vonnegut's shapes of stories, IO9 did a great breakdown of this, so Google that and check it out, and they even actually linked to the video that we watched earlier. But he throws out basically 4 or 5, and then the Cinderella story is kind of broken down a bit because it's a step story.
Right.
But he throws out Man in the Hole, which we all know is the main character gets into trouble and then gets out of it again in the end.
Right.
Which is that bell curve in reverse, that Bell Valley, I guess. And then the second one is The Boy Meets Girl, where good things happen, bad things happen, but they end up good. From Bad to Worse, where things are bad and then they only get really bad. And then he also throws out The Which Way Is Up, and link the examples they give is Hamlet, where there's an ambiguity, so you don't actually know if something good or something bad is happening to the character. And then they throw out the Cinderella one, which is the step based. I'll let Vonnegut describe that, his whole step-based theory on story.
We'll talk about it in a moment.
Yeah,
let's talk about
but there's a great whole thing on, you know, they even come with cool graphics.
Cool.
And they break down some books to show you how they would look in Vonnegut's curve.
Well, let's talk about the next one, which is the Boy Meets Girl wave. So, and it doesn't, and to borrow from Kurt, as he says, it doesn't necessarily have to be a boy, it doesn't actually have to be Boy Meets Girl, but it's the wave that we're talking about. So you've got your average person, nothing really happening. Suddenly something super wonderful happens. They meet the girl in this case here, and then so things are great, and suddenly, darn it. Darn it, darn it, darn it, darn it, darn it. And things go downhill, and eventually they start to get better, and they get the girl back in the end. By the way, I'm sorry. By the way, that's basically the plot for every single romance that's out there.
Exactly what I was going to say. And what better illustration of that could there be than Gone with the Wind? As Scarlett O'Hara is a very determined little girl during the Civil War. But then, of course, things crash because of the Civil War, and she doesn't get the man that she wanted. Things go very much down. So in this case, it's girl gets boy, but not for a really long time. And not the right boy, for that matter. But that doesn't matter. It's still the same idea, even though it happens more than once. So she marries, not for love, for money. This husband dies, she does it again, marries for love. For money, not for love.
See, if you put it a little part of that, you could get that Boy Meets Girl, whatever. But if you look at over the course of the story, Gone with the Wind, I guess it's because it's such a long story, but no, that is not the typical boy meets girl, boy loses a girl, boy gets girl. Because if you remember the end of Gone with the Wind, spoiler alert, but I'm sorry, Gone with the Wind is a very old book and a very popular movie. At the end, she loses boy.
But boy gets girl, and then loses her. But that may only be temporary. There is a sequel, after all, not one that Margaret Mitchell wrote.
But the point is, at the end of that story, she's in the hole again. So that is not the shape of Boy Meets Girl.
No. It Boy Meets Girl with a big drop off back down again into the hole.
Mm-hmm. That's a different shape, or an additional shape, or a complication of a shape.
No.
Which is absolutely fine.
Oh, yeah.
All lines and curves do not have to be regular.
not saying that it isn't fine, it's just not a good example for the nice, pure shape.
Okay, well, okay.
That's actually something we should probably totally say as a big giant disclaimer here, that the shape of your story might not look like the shape of Kurt Vonnegut's graph.
Mhm.
Right.
That's totally okay.
And I was going to say, too, as I said earlier, I believe there are other shapes of stories out there that weren't covered by Kurt.
Yeah.
So
We did a whole episode on the ring theory. Right? Theory.
You were going to go exactly where I wanted to go in a little bit. So, yes, we will talk about the ring theory. I also want to talk about the hero's journey in a bit. So, another one that Kurt covered was from bad to worse. Basically, main character starts off poorly, then continues to get worse with no hope for improvement. I would say the best, and I'm going to knock it off of the book for a second because I don't know if it was ever a book, but probably the best example that comes to my mind of this type of shape of story, where you start off kind of okay, and then going bad, and you just take the plunge right into the hole and you never will come out of it, was Requiem for a Dream. That is where the characters, I don't exactly remember how they begin, but anyway, it gets into the drug culture and sex, and in the end, the one main character goes to prison and ends up having his arm chopped off because he's gotten gangrene or something else from having having taken heroin so much. And it's basically the entry points got infected, and his girl gets hooked onto being on a prostitute. So yeah, that's one that's probably comes straight to my mind. I don't know if anyone has one as well that they might want to toss out. Yes.
Sure, Days of Wine and Roses, in which you have people who are kind of at the top of their game. They're beautiful and young and have interesting jobs in the ad world, and then find liquor, and liquor destroys them, and they slough down into the place where they have to live with her dad, and it's a pretty terrible existence. And one of them climbs out, but the other doesn't, which shows you how the two lines can diverge too when you have two people involved. So I think Days of Wine and Roses is an interesting study in that concept.
You know, and there's another story out there. Actually, it's a noir movie. It's one I absolutely hate, and I will say that right off the bat. It has a political statement that's just completely crazy. Not saying it's political, part of it's wrong, but it's just the craziness is way off base. But it is called Gun Crazy. And the concept of the story is you touch a gun, you're going to go start shooting people, left, right, and upside down. But what happens in the story is two characters meet, boy meets girl, and they do end up falling in love. And they're both sharpshooters, and somehow they get into this need because with their gun, they want to go out and start robbing banks and start shooting people. And they get in trouble with having shot a guard or something at one bank, whatever. And I know I'm leaving out a lot because they started off with embezzling first. But anyway, in the end, of course, there's lots of death and murder, and there's no escape for them at all. So that's
Speaking
also...
of Bonnie and Clyde.
Yeah, Bonnie and Clyde in real life.
And they've made several movies about that, but yes.
Yeah. Or even Bush and Sundance.
Mm-hmm.
So those are some good examples. Brad, you got any?
Yeah, actually, I'd throw out the Alien franchise.
Yes!
Which is pretty much every single one of those movies is that storyline of, either a group of people on a ship or a group of colonists on a ship or a bunch of people on a ship suddenly decide, or something bad happens. Usually the ship goes kabooey or kablooey or kaboom, or, suddenly they have to go land somewhere and check out something. But then they find an alien. The alien comes jumping out. It starts killing off the crew. Oh no, it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And then they make 3 of them, and the third one's really bad. And then they make like 5 of them, and then they go to the prequels, and those are just really no. Anyway, but that storyline of continuing on like that, of that just endless, each member of the crew getting killed off until finally Ripley doesn't die, is basically the happy moment of that movie. That Ripley doesn't die, and so yeah, I would throw out all the Alien movies for that arc right there.
Yeah, I
The
imagine
lack of arc.
Yeah.
not all horror movies, but I imagine a whole lot of horror movies have this general shape.
Uh-huh. And I would
So.
think so.
I could imagine a few horror movies actually have a happy ending, but
Well, you have a survivor's ending, so take your pick if that's happy or not, but I call it
a little
survivor's
hope is about all you get.
ending. Yeah.
But that's better than nothing.
But you're right. Thinking about it, I Know What You Did Last Summer and its sequels, every single to Friday the 13th, every single to Halloween, every single to... I'm saying singles, didn't I? Yeah, every single episode or every single movie of. And also, that's the same thing with Nightmare on Elm Street. And I will still say, my favorite Friday the 13th is one where you've got a telekinetic throwing stuff into Jason's face. Okay. So the next shape that Kurt covers is Which Way Is Up.
well, how would that look on the graph?
Believe it or
It's a
not,
straight line.
yes, it's a straight line.
Okay.
And the story
Probably
has
have a story arc with a straight line.
story arc with a straight line. The
Yeah,
story
I didn't exactly agree with that graph either. Technically, it would be a jagged line going back and forth where you're never quite certain if it's an up or a down. But
Yeah.
you went with a straight line.
So, as Brad said before, this is kind of like Hamlet. The story has a lifelike ambiguity that keeps us from knowing if the developments are good or bad. That can almost be every noir story out there.
Yeah, but the end of Hamlet is, everybody dies. You think that's kind of bad. Well, not everybody dies. but-
Okay. I said noir stories, which also, when I say noir, really noir is film. Hard-boiled detective is the book version. And the book version is what gave us the films. But take Maltese Falcon. In the end, the woman that he loves is off to jail.
Oh, he puts her there.
He puts her in jail.
Exactly.
Yeah. Nobody has the Maltese Falcon, and I'm trying to remember.
Oh, they have it. It's just not what they thought
Yeah,
it would
it's
be.
not. Yeah, it's not.
Yes.
They have a Falcon. It's
Yeah,
just
they
not.
have a stone representation
Nation
of a
of a
falcon.
falcon.
Yeah.
Yeah, they don't have the golden falcon. I'm trying to remember if the other bad guys got caught in the end, or if they were taking, or
They mostly died already.
yeah. But there was a couple at the end that were talking about. Okay, well, I know another place to go look for this thing. Anyway, it's been a
Yeah,
while.
they do. There's a group of them that are running off there at the end.
Yeah,
But they weren't the killers. They were the mercenaries.
yeah,
Yeah.
basically. So I would call that an example. Anyone else have any?
Of ambiguous stories?
Yeah.
A lot of comedies, actually. And the reason I throw that out is because, and I don't know if this is necessarily that same effect, but it's the notion that nothing has changed in the story from the beginning to the end. A lot of funny things and zany things and all that kind of stuff happened along the way. But in the end, the characters go on with their lives as if nothing's really happened. We don't know if the events in their lives suddenly have destroyed them or not. Most of the time it hasn't. It's all, seemingly okay and ready for, the next episode and the, second in the series. So I would almost throw out like pretty much most of your major comedies that, and not all of them, because obviously some comedies try and follow the redemption arc or something along those lines. But, your screwball comedies.
Yeah.
I will say maybe series that, again, what happens in an episode doesn't really affect the next episode. So most episodic series, I suppose.
Yeah.
Could be. Yeah.
Or many of them, not most, maybe.
Well, I'm not sure the Marx Brothers or something like that fits the mold, but I would say that Charlie Chaplin films do, as he's the little tramp and he has problems, and then he kind of gets a little better, but then it sinks back down, and you can't tell because sometimes he is like a thief. He is not a nice guy at all, and sometimes it turns out well, and sometimes it doesn't. I would think his are pretty ambiguous.
Yeah. I'm gonna get myself into trouble, so I will say it. Maybe Star Wars: The Last Jedi falls into this too. Anyway, I'm being bad. Moving right along. Okay, well that's some.
No, I can see that fault definitely.
Yeah.
Because it's like, who won that? A lot of people died.
Did anybody win that? And
Scorched Earth.
did the characters even develop? Anyway, so moving right along before I get myself in trouble and Right Pack Radio shows up on somebody's hate list. Actually, please do that because that means we'll have even more listeners.
Especially if you're insulting The Last Jedi. That's not a well-liked movie at the moment.
No, right now a lot of people are insulting it. So Brad, you were talking about ring theory. This is another shape of story. Can you give us ring theory? Because you're the.
I'll do it quickly because we did an entire episode on this.
Please.
And we did that one at my behest too. No, so yes, basically it is the notion that you start a story and you tell a story to a certain point. Kind of coming up and rising in the story, and that the descent of the story and the second half of it follows that same arc so that you end up mirroring where you started at the end. And thus it is a circle and comes back on itself and is an old form of storytelling. It's one of the oldest forms of storytelling that we have, apparently, if you go and read all about it. We did a whole episode on it, so go back and listen to that episode because it was really cool and I had notes.
Yes, you did have notes. A short version of that is, once again, I'm picking on Star Wars, but the Star Wars 1 through 6. I'm leaving the newer ones alone with this, but let's see if I can remember how this worked. 1 mirrored 4. No. 1 mirrored 6, 2 mirrored 5, and 3 mirrored 4. If I remember how that worked.
Correct. And there's a whole great breakdown of that you can read too, where they'll do a shot-for-shot comparison, and you can see where they actually basically if the ship's on the left side of the screen in the one film, it's on the right side of the screen in the other film. And it's just, there's a whole thing on it.
Yep. So we had talked about also the standard 3-act arc. How is that? What's that shape?
Well, we didn't talk about the Cinderella one. You want to talk about that?
Oh, I missed the Cinderella one. I'm
Hey,
sorry.
we gotta talk about the Cinderella one. 'cause
Okay,
we've
so
been teasing it
Cinderella.
for a while,
Okay.
talking about how complicated it looks.
Sorry. So Cinderella. The shape of Cinderella's story is basically a stair-shaped beginning of a stair pyramid with a sudden drop off and then also sudden rise to happiness. So how this works, everybody there should know, everybody who's listening probably knows the Cinderella story. Daughter has father who marries bad stepmother who has now 2 daughters that become a stepsister, and Cinderella is their servant. So you really can't start in too much of a more depressing place than where Cinderella starts at. And life is kind of bad as the family's getting ready to go to the castle to have this, be a part of this big party. And suddenly the fairy godmother shows up. And the fairy godmother gives her shoes and gives her a gown and gives her this and gives her that and gives her transportation.
Incremental steps up towards happiness.
Exactly what that is. And then she goes to the dance. She goes to the ball, ends up dancing with the prince. Life is happy. And then all of a sudden, because the clock is striking midnight and she's got to get back before midnight, because all the gifts get taken away, you go crashing right back into the bad side, or the negative side. However, it doesn't go down as far as where she started, because she's had all this experience, had this experience now that no matter what else will happen, will stay with her. It's a happy moment. She'll remember it. But that's not how the story ends. So she's back in the bad zone. She's a little better than she was. And then here comes the prince looking for the person who lost their shoe. Cinderella's feet fill it. They're in love. Suddenly your story goes arching back up like a skyrocket. And in the end, she has eternal happiness as they will live happily ever after.
And her sisters are missing toes because they chopped them off to try and fit their feet in there. So
Yes.
karma.
Yep. That is not in the Disney version. Just putting it there.
I was just thinking about it, and some Shirley Temple movies followed this without being Cinderella.
There are a lot of movies and a lot of books that follow this arc, and this is not something new, but this is a perfect example of one. Fedora.
Well, I think that the Cinderella focus is exactly what was used by, was it Benicio del Toro in The Shape of Water, this year's Academy Award winner. In fact, it's sort of a double Cinderella story. We start out with a woman who has had a terrible background and cannot speak because she has no ability to speak, though she can hear just fine. She is a cleaner during the Cold War in a secret kind of military-industrial complex sort of building. She has a pretty hideous life, and the person she lives with is a real clunker, too. But then she meets a rather unlikely sort of prince who looks like the creature from the Black Lagoon. And step by step, with eggs, they become friends. And eventually, that blossoms into something much better, but then it all crashes down as people are trying to kill this monster. But it has a wonderful, happily ever after ending that is beyond magic. And so I think it is a salvation both to her and to the creature.
Okay.
Which is a double Cinderella story.
I'm not so sure if that's a Cinderella story or just a variation of. It is. Kurt Vonnegut only started out with one person in the dumps, but other than that, it's very much. If you look at the shape, it's the boy meets girl story, but just starting from a lower point. It's
Well, the Cinderella story is a boy meets girl story too.
Yeah, but I mean, it's just. I don't see the steps there. It seems like the general curves.
Well,
They have a lot of setbacks.
Yeah.
yeah. Any other shapes that we can think of out there? There's one I can think of. But I'm going to see if anyone else has one. Once, twice. Okay. Well, what about the hero's journey? That's technically every time I've ever seen it described as a circle.
Is it a circle or is it a semicircle?
Well,
Because I know they always show it as a circle, but it's life to death, and it's really a journey. So it never seems like you're coming back to the beginning. It always seems like you are coming back down to the level of where you started. It's my one thing about the hero's journey.
well, okay. I'm gonna borrow the hero's journey.
I think it looks more like a U or that type of a curve than the actual circle back. But hey, to each his own. Joseph Campbell wrote a really cool book.
Yeah, I agree. But let's look at Tolkien, either The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings. In the end, Bilbo or Frodo, whichever one you want to look at, does return to the Shire. He's definitely a different person. But in the end of that. But anyway, so the steps of the hero's journey. Brad, I'm going to toss it to you.
Oh, the steps. Okay, well, we all know them because we've all seen Star Wars.
Yes.
So you have innocent noob who's sitting somewhere, whether that's a farm, a spaceport, castle, wherever. This noob then will undoubtedly need to break free of whatever confines they're in. They will need to go seek out training from a mentor. That mentor will then have to die so that they can then be vaulted forward and become the person that they're supposed to become. They will then do the heroic acts, and then, not a part of this, but then they will live long enough to become the villain. Sorry.
Thank you, little Batman there.
No, but then they come back around and have to go back home, changed by their warrior ways and all of that. So the hero's journey, it's a wonderful tale. You've heard it in Star Wars and in
Lord of the Rings, Hobbit, and basically every single fairy tale, but not fairy tale, but every myth out
well,
there.
and every YA dystopian that's come out recently, whether it be any of the Divergent series or whether it be
Hunger Games.
Hunger Games, thank you, that's the one I'm trying to think of. All of them follow Campbell's hero's journey to some level. They all pick and pull. He's got some very set things that have to happen along the way in his hero's journey's arc. And we have literally been taking that arc and pulling it to pieces and using it just as it is since Star Wars pointed it out.
Well, and actually, to borrow from Campbell, we've been technically using that really since, over 5,000 years.
Yes, very true. But Campbell's version since at least the 70s.
Right. What is, okay, let me ask this question. We did, romance definitely has the boy meets girl story shape. Is there any other story shapes that lend themselves to a particular genre? I would say Hero's Journey is, of course, fantasy. Go ahead.
I was going to say, yeah, obviously the hero's journey has kind of been usurped by fantasy,
Right.
to be its mainstay. But yeah, I mean, all of these kind of fall in, whether it's the boy meets girl, whether it's the revenge plot, whether it's the, we all have to gather up to overcome something. There are these
Avengers Assemble.
These iconic storylines, however many there are. But yeah, there's probably an arc for each one.
And when you guys go to plot your story, are you plotting along those lines ahead of time? How do you plot? Or do you know people who do plotting this way? Is it something which here's where I'm going with that question. Is this something in which plotters, when they tell their story, or even pantsers, because they figured out which one they want to do, just follow it as they're writing, either instinctively or have written it on paper, or is this something that comes about dissecting the story after you've written it?
I have a related question that's slightly different. I was wondering about basically the axis. The axis is life is going good or a person has problems. I'm wondering if there isn't another aspect to that.
A third axis? Axis? Go for it, Brad.
Well, I don't have an answer to that, so if anyone has an answer to Melanie's question,
Yeah.
feel free to jump in on that. But what I was going to throw out is to answer your question, Dave, and that first off, as I said earlier with the disclaimer that your story may be different than Vonnegut's. The shape of the story is really just a way of reminding yourself the way that readers like stories to unfold. And when I say that, it's just the most popular stories throughout history have all followed these models. So obviously we as a species really enjoy these particular tales. So because of that, it's something to keep in the back of your mind. I never plot off the curve. Like, I never am thinking, I shouldn't say never, but I don't sit there and go, here's where this moment's going to be, here's where this moment's going to be, oh yeah, now I'm at the top of the curve, and now here's where my descending come in. I will, in the sense of, I know that there's a climax, I know I have to build up to that climax, and I know that I have to tell the story after that, and it will obviously descend from there. But the reality is that to me, a story looks much more like a waveform in the sense that it rises and falls as good things happen to the characters, and probably that waveform then follows the arc. Because good things happen to the characters and bad things happen to the characters along your story, at least they should, to make it an interesting story. And that is a better way of plotting your novel, is knowing the key points you have to hit and then making it exciting until you get to those moments.
Fedora.
In crime fiction, it seems to me there are sort of two possibilities. One is, well, either one is going to start with a problem that has to be solved. A murder, for example, or a big theft, or something that is a precipitating factor. Okay, so that is sort of a given, or the first thing that you're going to have in crime fiction. And from there, you have two possible ways to go. One is the how done it. That is, you know who did it, or the expert detective like Columbo has a good idea of who did it and has to simply prove what happened and how it was done. And so step by step, he niggles and tiggles and gets around it somehow and gets a confession at the end. That's a how done it, or a procedural. And the other is we have no idea who did it. And that's more like the Agatha Christie model, where you once again start with a precipitating event like a murder, and from there then the sleuth must deduce who is likely to have done it and for what motives, and test each of these theories until finally Agatha Christie gets everybody in the room and somehow names the killer.
I mean, honestly, that's the one I love. Agatha Christie. That's the one part of the cozy whodunits that are out there. You get everybody into a room. Why didn't the killer just grab a weapon and start shooting people? Or
Sometimes
it was a different time. You don't know.
I know. Of course, Earl Stanley Gardner had a different way of doing that. Everybody was in the room because they were in the courtroom.
Yeah.
Brad, over to you.
Yes, modern detective. We just need to get everybody in a room, and then the killer will confess. That's why haven't we thought of this?
Well, if it's
We can change all policing.
if it's a hard-boiled detective, I'm going to come back to you, Brad. It's a hard-boiled detective, like what I've been working on lately. You take everybody in the room, you start beating the living crap out of them until they confess. Go for it, Brad.
Exactly. But I was going to throw out that there are other arcs, I suppose, in that we come in with the ways that we can twist stories. One of them being like the narrator that is unreliable. That story arc is not necessarily going to look like the beautiful waves that Kurt Vonnegut has created, because in the end, those, having an unreliable narrator means that at points you might think the character is having a bad time, when in reality it's exactly what they want, and you don't know that because you're the narrator is technically lying to you at the moment, or misleading you. Other ways that you can have this is when you do certain stories that you flip the way that you tell things, like in Breaking a Fourth Wall, obviously. If you're going to do the Deadpool kind of stuff, Deadpool's going to turn to you and tell you if he's having a good day or a bad day. So it almost doesn't matter the way the arc's going, and he can have sudden drops and sudden rises and huge peaks and huge valleys, and just turn to the camera and kind of blow it off and have no day of it, or turn to the camera and be like, "Oh my God, did you see that?" And that's why I would say that your story probably will not look like these beautiful Vonnegut waves.
And by the way, if you want to see a different version of the Deadpool concept there, this is a theory that's out there, and based on the evidence I've seen supporting it, I would have to agree. But it is any of the Batman stories with the Joker. The Joker breaks the fourth wall frequently in the comics. I haven't seen it in the movies yet. So with that,
I was thinking this, I don't know if this gets back to what Brad was saying about different, basically you can tell it a different way and that will affect the shape of your story, or maybe it's a whole new axis. But I was just thinking those detective stories like Sherlock Holmes.
yeah.
Sometimes Sherlock Holmes has a personal stake in the story, but a lot of times he doesn't really have a very strong personal stake other than solving the puzzle. There are stakes involved, but the stakes involved are for his client. And he's not directly involved other than, again, it's...
Well, yeah, in the private eye type stories in which you're kind of hinting at there, be it Sherlock Holmes, be it Spencer from Robin B. Parker, be it Easy Rawlins from Walter Mosley, and so forth. Take your picks. Even Sarah, what's her name? My mind just went blank. And that famous author who writes them, Sarah something or other, starts with a P. I'm going to look this up. I can't believe I'm blanking on it. Anyway, what happens is their personal stake tends to be either, like with Holmes, he needs the mystery to solve. Oh, it's going to go kind of nutsy. Mm-hmm. Or go back on the cocaine.
The 7% solution?
Yes. Or like Rollins or Spencer for Hire. They are your common person hero, and they've got a code that they're following. So really, in a weird way, they're following a knight's tale as they're trying to solve a mystery. And that can follow a couple different curves of the Vonnegut style. Go for it.
There is also the possibility that you can have more than one plot arc going on at a time.
Oh, yeah.
You can have a boy meets girl plot at the same time that you have a mystery plot or a hero's journey kind of plot.
Yeah, most certainly. And that actually will deepen your story, or should deepen your story. Assuming you don't overdo it. There's that.
I believe we call those subplots.
Yes, subplots are good, but
Speaking what, Brad, were you talking about, Other Way, the Unreliable Narrator, I'm blanking on the name of the movie. It was based on a book. The husband is accused of or his wife disappears.
Okay.
And he's the suspect in her murder or whatever.
Gone Girl.
Thank you.
Ah,
That's
yes.
Perfect case of an unreliable narrator, and she's not even the main character, but you get her diary entries, especially in the book. So.
And now I'm driving myself nuts because I can't think of that author's name, not actor.
Yeah. But that's a case where it is. It'd be very hard to figure out the shape of the story, because there's the shape of the story you have the first time you read it, and then it turns out your perceptions are all changed when you get to the end, or the middle, or whatever it is.
Anyway, while I'm here, it is Sarah Petresky.
Okay.
Paretsky.
V.I.
Paretsky?
Yeah, Paretsky. Thank you.
Okay.
I didn't say I was pronouncing it correctly. V.I. Warshawski.
V.I. Warshawski, yes.
Okay. Somebody who really plays with doing two different charts at the same time, Raymond Benson. If you read his Black Stiletto series, which I absolutely fell in love with. It hit me at the right time, because I had just put my mom in a nursing home at the time when she's got dementia. In the story takes place, it's about modern day man has a mother who is in the Alzheimer ward, and he's dealing with that. And he inherits her property, and he finds these diaries, and it turns out this mother was, back in the 60s, a superhero. And you go through the diaries learning that some adventure that happened as he's reading it, and it connects up with the modern day, what's going on. I don't want to spoil the stories. There's 5 books right now, but it interweaves, and you can actually, if you look at it, it's kind of like also the shape of the stories interweave itself, and they meet up at certain points. So with that, any other thoughts on shapes of stories?
So why is it important?
Good question. Why is it important? Why does it matter?
Well, I think Vonnegut was trying to say that these are stories that we are used to. They are part of our cultural heritage, and so they resonate with us. And that may be a good reason for us as writers trying to follow them, or at least incorporate various aspects of them into our own writing, because they're tried and true. They work.
So what, should we analyze and figure out the shape of some of our favorite stories, and then analyze the shape of our draft novel and see how far apart they are?
Maybe it couldn't hurt.
Yeah.
Do that.
You get the Cupid doll.
Okay.
Or is it Cupid doll? Okay, and with that, I'm going to have this episode end because I can't think of any better way to end that. So tune in next week for yet another interesting topic in the writing industry. Next week we are going to be talking about a famous Western writer and an aspect of what he was known for. Stay tuned. And please share this with your writer friends and subscribe on whatever platform you listen to. Thank you. The new theme songs for Right Pack Radio were written and performed by Meredith Tate. All copyrights remain with her.